welcome, Dr. Grandin.
It's good to be here.
So maybe we can start for our audience with a question about your early childhood, what it was like to be an autistic child in the 50s, and what your journey was like.
Well, first of all, I want to introduce myself that I am now a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. But when I was a young child, when I was 3, I was very severely autistic, no speech, repetitive behavior, lots of screaming. And I was really lucky to get into a really excellent early educational program. Speech therapy, teaching, turn taking, can't emphasize enough the importance of early therapy. I also had excellent elementary school. And my 3rd grade teacher was the head of the school. Small classes, I was mainstreamed into a normal kindergarten and elementary school. And Mrs. Deach, the head teacher, explained to the other children that I had a disability that was not visible, like a wheelchair, and they should not be bullying and teasing me. So I managed to get to elementary school without being bullied. My mother always encouraged my ability in art. I'm a big believer in take the thing the kid's good at and expand it. For another kid, that might be mathematics. High school, in a regular high school, is a disaster. I ended up getting kicked out for throwing a book at a girl who called me a retard. And I ended up going to a special school for kids with problems. Now you got to remember the era. This was 60s, so they thought everything was emotional. And I'm a terrible student, didn't care about studying. So they put me to work running the horse barn. And I cleaned 9 stalls every day. I took care of the horses. I put them in and out of the barn. And one of the few places where I was not bullied was shared interests: horseback riding, electronics lab, and the Model Rocket Club. I can't emphasize enough the importance of shared interests. Another big concern I have with school systems, in some places they've taken out all the hands-on classes: art, music, sewing, woodworking, welding, theater. If I hadn't had those kind of activities, I would have done really badly. In fact, in my career designing livestock handling facilities, I worked with great big meat plants, and we were out there installing equipment. And I worked with talented people that owned metal fabrication shops that were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And then finally, my science teacher got me interested in studying, because now studying was a pathway to a goal. Mm-hmm. Another big hurdle I'm seeing on the fully verbal end of the autism spectrum, kids are not learning how to work. I'm seeing lots of kids doing really, really well in academics, but they're graduating from high school, they've never held a job. They're not learning life skills, things like shopping, things that I was doing when I was 7 and 8 years old.
Lovely. So I'm hearing, if I understand you correctly, I'm hearing lots of positive experiences from early intervention, but also your early schooling years with really integrated school environments and people who encouraged the things that you really enjoyed. And then a not too uncommon, unfortunately, to this day experience of high school, where you were rejected by your peers and had to be removed from your integrated setting, but you got the opportunity to explore what you like to do with your hands, and that gave you a path to something that you may be interested in.
Well, I think students ask me all the time, well, how'd you get interested in the cattle industry? Well, I got exposed to it at my aunt's ranch, and she was another really important mentor. And that's where I got exposed to the cattle industry. I'm concerned that a lot of kids today, especially some kid with some kind of disability, isn't getting exposed to enough things to figure out what they might like to do. The other problem you have with autism is it's so variable. You're going from Elon Musk. Elon Musk has autism. SpaceX, Elon Musk. Einstein probably had autism. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody who's nonverbal that may have very severe epilepsy on top of the autism. So you've got this gigantic spectrum where the individuals are very different, and they're all called the same thing. Now, when kids are real little, when you work on the early intervention, you can do more or less the same things with all of them. But when they get older, they divide into different groups that need very, very different services.
Thank you for that. I will pick up on that thought in a second. But first, I'm wondering whether you can tell us a bit about how you think your autistic difference helped your career or guided your career as an animal scientist and an author.
Well, I think it helped me that I'm a visual thinker. And when I first started out working with cattle, I did not know that other people thought in words. But visual thinking helped me because animals live in a sensory-based world, not a word-based world. And so it was obvious to me to do things like look at what cattle were seeing walking through a chute. And other people didn't think to look at those things. Well, I guess if you thought verbally, you wouldn't think that much about what cattle or any other animal was seeing. We were out riding some horses today, and the photographer was there with a drone. I was not happy about this. And it came in like this, and then it reared up like a hornet's nest right in front of the horse. And that's the kind of thing could scare the horse. Now I'm seeing that right now. I could hear it too. And it kind of reared up like to get a really good picture. I didn't think that was very safe when we were riding, and nobody told us they were going to have a drone there that day. But as I'm telling you this story, I am re-experiencing it. It's not in words, it's in pictures, and then the hornet's nest sound I can hear too, and the horse's ears were like an airport radar glued to that drone. And he was upset about it.
I'm sure. So I mean, I love hearing you talk about this. I've heard you talk about this before. This idea that although there are areas of difficulty, there are some areas of particular strength that may sometimes even exceed the abilities of the average neurotypical person, that may actually be capitalized for development of a career path and an interest and there's
a lot of people that work in the tech industry that are very brilliant mathematically that are probably on the autism spectrum. You see, you take out some social circuits and then you get circuits for, interesting things like doing math or designing things. Now, the thing I learned really early on, and I discussed that in my book, Thinking in Pictures, you may have seen this, is I showed people my drawings. The way you sell your work is you show people samples of your work. And I figured that out really early on. When they saw the drawings, they were impressed. And now I want to emphasize, not everybody who's autistic thinks in pictures. You can have a picture thinker like me, that's called an object visualizer. You can have a mathematical thinker that's going to be good at engineering and computer programming, or you can have a word thinker who loves words, details involving words, and they think in words, and they're not a visual thinker. But in autism, you tend to be really good at one thing and really bad at something else. I was horrible at algebra. And I'm concerned that a lot of smart visual thinkers like me get screened out because we can't do algebra. Mm-hmm. Well, for the things I do, you don't need algebra. You need the old-fashioned arithmetic, the way it used to be taught. And that I could do just fine. Mm-hmm.
So you got the flexibility of the educational system required to allow you to find your path.
Well, getting out of algebra was just luck. When I went to college in '67, it was not the required course. And the required course was called finite math, and it had probability, statistics, and matrices. That's a bit more visual, and with tutoring, I was able to do that. Fortunately for me, the required college course was not algebra. That was just lucky.
Okay. We'll take that. Okay, so I have another question for you that we struggle with, and we would love your perspective. So typically research in the development, so this is a research institute that occupies its time with a lot of different disabilities, including autism. And as we are studying across different types of disabilities, we're realizing that a lot of the kids who carry different labels, diagnostic labels, are more similar to each other than kids that carry the same label. So to your example, a kid with an autistic child who has a lot of good language but has some inattention and hyperactivity or some anxiety, may be more similar to a child who doesn't have autism but has hyperactivity and anxiety than a child who has absolutely no language but has autism. So we're trying to understand if we go beyond diagnostic labels and we focus on kids' strengths.
Well, this is what Deborah Moore and I've done. This new book's just come out, Navigating Autism. And Deborah Moore talks about label locking. And I think this is especially a problem for the people who think in language. They get so locked into the label, where I'm thinking about, okay, examples of people on the spectrum, Elon Musk. Then I'm looking at some nonverbal individuals such as Tito Mukapadahe, and I see him. You see, it's not abstract. And then I see another child with very severe epilepsy on top of autism, completely nonverbal, very severe. And you've put the same label on Elon Musk and on somebody that can't dress themselves. To me, that makes no sense to a visual thinker. And my mind thinks in specific examples. I like what Stephen Hawking says about disability. And he was interviewed by the New York Times, and he said, concentrate on those things that your disability does not prevent you from doing well. And he could do math in his head really well, and that was about all. But he did math in his head wonderfully.
Great. So this is kind of the movement of taking a strengths-based approach with kids with autism and other disabilities and thinking about what they can do rather than what they can't do.
Well, I went to Disabilities Conference a number of years ago, and there was a very articulate blind person there. Yeah. And he gave a very discouraging talk about being turned down for 20 jobs for a telephone customer service job, which he was totally capable of doing. And I think what happens is that the human resource person, like sees the guide dog and whatever and panics and just thinks, well, these accommodations are just going to be too hard. And I think he should have presented himself differently. You know what? I could be a really great customer service agent. You see my dog now. You think it's going to be really hard to give me reasonable accommodations? It's going to be easy. I need one thing from you, and just one thing. I need special software on the computer. My friend's going to come in to help me learn the office. Just put the software on the computer. I'll give you a free trial for 2 weeks. I think if he'd gone in with that approach, he would have landed some of these jobs. Mm-hmm. But I've worked on the corporate side of things, and I can just see them panicking that it's going to be so hard to do the accommodations. I had a blind roommate when I was in graduate school, so I know it's easy to do the accommodations. We had 2 beds obviously in the room, and we put mine closest to away from the door, so she wouldn't have to go through my stuff to get to her stuff. And I was very careful not to leave anything out on her side of the room, and everything was fine.
So I mean, I was not planning to talk to you about employment, but since you're starting this, there is a lot of angst and a lot of research about how little employed or meaningfully employed autistic adults are, given their skill sets. Do you have any thoughts or perspectives on this one?
Well, I think when you start, first thing we need to do when kids are young is develop their strengths. And in my book, The Autistic Brain, I talk about the different ways of thinking. Visual thinker like me, we're going to be really good with mechanical things and fixing mechanical things like cars. Also good at art, graphic design. Then you have the mathematical thinkers, engineering, computer programming, chemistry, physics. And then you have the word thinkers, which one job the word thinkers can be really good at is specialized retail, where they're going to be recognized for their knowledge of a product. There's been some very big successes with selling cars. They've been extremely good at that because they knew every car on the lot. And the big problem I'm seeing is not learning work skills early, because I have granddads coming up to me all the time, and they discover they're on the autism spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. Now, these would probably be the Asperger type with no speech delay. And I'm seeing Junior growing up today, and he's not learning job skills, where that grandfather figures out that he's autistic when the kids are diagnosed. But I'm seeing kids graduating from college never had a job. Well, this is just ridiculous. And I say to parents, well, who do you know that owns a shop? And I get them to think about it. And they go, there's a yogurt shop down the road. I know them. And ice cream shops and yogurt shops have worked really well because you serve one customer at a time. You've got to avoid jobs with lots of crazy multitasking. Those do not work. Super crazy, busy takeout window, don't put them there. Also, give them a pilot's checklist for step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 of some task. Don't expect them to remember long sequences of verbal instruction. That's another very, very simple accommodation.
Lovely. Thank you for the insights. Maybe I'll ask you a different question. This is a research institute. So you're speaking to the audience of the research institute. And I'm wondering where you see autism research going in the next few years. Where would your experience as a scientist, but also your lived experience as an autistic person, put priorities for research?
Sensory problems would be a big priority for me. They can be extremely debilitating. Now, I've been on antidepressant medication for years. That's calmed down a lot of my anxiety. But sensory problems, noise sensitivity, sound sensitivity, touch sensitivity, ways to treat the sensory problems, because they can be extremely debilitating. You know, can you imagine working in an office if the LED lights flickered like a strobe light? And some of those cheap light bulbs that are LEDs, they flicker. Even I can see them. They don't bother me, but I can see it. But some of the sensory issues and ways to treat the sensory problems, because they can make it very difficult to be social. Because how can you be social if you can't tolerate being in noisy places where people socialize?
Thank you. So yeah, sensory issues as a barrier to developing other skills, right? And to be able to demonstrate and showcase your skills if you cannot tolerate the sensory environment.
But the sensory ways to, now sometimes with, you can help reduce sound sensitivity if the person turns on the dreaded noise, whether it's a hair dryer or whatever, power tool, whatever the thing is, where the person turns it on and off themselves, and they control it. That can sometimes help reduce sound sensitivity of things like a car horn or a loud bell or some other thing like that.
Thank you. Maybe I can ask you a question about your career. So thinking back to your career as a scientist and an author and a professor, what are you most proud of? What accomplishments would you highlight as the things that you think are your contributions?
Well, in my career, I've done a lot of work to improve how livestock are handled. I first started out designing equipment. You've got 2 large beef plants in Canada where I designed equipment in them, a thing called a center track restrainer system. I developed that. I also developed a system for evaluating animal handling that's been used very successfully around the world to improve how animals are handled. That I'm proud of. Well, and then I have things like, coolest drawing I ever did, things like that too. But the things that I get really interested in are things that make real difference. When I have a parent write to me and say, well, my son got a job, bought a house because of your book, that makes me happy. I'm not into the abstract. Visual thinkers aren't abstract. Verbal thinkers tend to have big abstract concepts. I like someone writes to me and said, well, my kid is working in an office supply store now, and he just blossomed. This is why we've got to get these kids out doing things, and because otherwise they won't develop. And I'm seeing too many kids addicted to video games, and they're going nowhere. And I think my kind of thinker is the kind that gets addicted to video games. And there's been some successes with substituting video games with car mechanics. And one individual is working for the railroad fixing trains, and they really like him. Now, you see, my mind thinks in specific examples. You see, it's bottom up. Mm-hmm. It's the same way that computers think. Computers are also bottom up thinkers when they're used for diagnostics. They're trained to sort melanoma cancer lesions, which from other types of skin rashes and bruises, mosquito bites, or whatever that might be on your body. And they're trained with vast databases of melanoma, and then other kinds of skin rashes. That's bottom-up thinking. They're trained by specific example. That's how I think.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that about 5 years ago about artificial intelligence, and I go, wow, the autistic brain.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, the part of the work in this institute is looking at the diversity of brains, like what is the diversity of the different ways brains work and think within autism and outside of autism. Like this is part of the neurodiversity story of all these different.
Well, diverse ways of thinking are important because they bring different skills to a job. Now I'm going to give you engineering and industrial examples because that's what I've worked on. My kind of mind, ones that can't do algebra, we do what I call the clever engineering department. So you go to a big food processing plant, very clever mechanical equipment, think packaging equipment, stuff like that, very clever. And then the more mathematical engineers will do the boilers and the refrigeration because that's much more mathematical. And my kind of mind doesn't really understand boilers and refrigeration. And I have seen that division of engineering jobs, every job I've been on. And what this shows is that the skills complement each other. I have co-authors on a lot of my books because I need the verbal thinker to organize my thoughts better. You see, that's an example of complementary skills. Mm-hmm. And people ask me, well, how do we work with more diverse minds? The first thing you have to learn is that different ways of thinking exist. I was shocked when I was in my late 30s and I found out that other people thought in words. That was a shock to me. And the word thinkers are kind of shocked when then how does somebody kind of think in math or think in pictures? So you realize these ways of thinking are different, but they bring very different skills together. And when you put them together in well-managed teams of people, they can do some really great things.
So if you allow me, so obviously what you just highlighted is important for thinking about how we put together workspaces and invention teams and all of that. But could you tell me how you think about mentoring and training and teaching, knowing that you have that many different brains in your audience as your
Well, I have, in my lectures of livestock handling, I got lots of pictures, but I also have plenty of verbal information. Because one thing I learned how to do that helped me get people to adopt better cattle handling is I wrote about it. And when I write, explaining like how to handle the cattle, I narrate the pictures. And so I've got good technical writing skills and not the greatest creative writing, but really good technical writing skills. But we got to develop skills. I think a lot of students don't get exposed to enough things to figure out what they might want to do for a career.
What's next for you?
What
is next for you?
Well, I'm 74 years old, and I think what I need to be doing now, I want to encourage the young students. I'm very concerned today that we've got young people growing up totally removed from the world of practical things. Okay, like problems we have with supply chain management and container ships. That's like super easy for me to understand. Oh, I would like to go fix the problems with our port. And I think I figured out what's wrong. You got too many people storing their containers there, and they need to get them out of there and rent warehouse space. That was one sentence in the Wall Street Journal. But you see, I see it. Mm-hmm. See, there's nothing abstract about it. Also, my kind of mind finds that stuff really super interesting. Where most people, I'm listening to music on the radio, and it's all about romance and love, and I'm more interested in interesting stuff. I think it'd be really good fun if I could go straighten that port out. It'd be a really fun job. And figure out how to do it without remodeling everything. Mm-hmm. I'm going to make sure that when the containers are unloaded, they get them off the yard really quickly. And then I'm going to see how much that frees up the port before I do the next thing. That was a single sentence in a Wall Street Journal article, but I was on it like that. Mm-hmm. You see, because I see it. You can't unload the ships if the yard is full. Mm-hmm.
Do they know that you're
a visual thinker? That's so obvious.
Yep. Do they know that you're interested in helping them?
Well, it's I write about things, and then I find out all kinds of people, read my articles. But I'm concerned we've got students growing up today who've never used a tool. And this is going to make this sort of over abstract verbal ways of solving problems worse. I was just reading an interesting article about in Portugal, they got some former military officer guy, and he put on his army uniform and he got people vaccinated. Rent a big venue, set up the stuff, do it. You see, I worked in construction for 25 years. You have to get jobs done. You have to actually do them. Not talk about them, do them. And I'm concerned, if the educational system's gotten so verbal that we're not going to have enough doing.
Any last thoughts for our research institute?
We need to be concentrating on what people can do, things that they can do. And when I was inducted to the Women's Hall of Fame, there was a wonderful lady there, and she had all these artificial legs. And she had her pretty dress leg that you put a dressy shoe on. It didn't walk that well, but it was really pretty. Then she had her sport legs. She had all these different legs. And then she had her fun legs decorated with all kinds of things. She had the perfect attitude towards it. It's a sort of can do. I really like the Paralympics. I think that's just wonderful. I think that was a wonderful thing that happened. It's showing what people can do. And like wheelchair basketball is a fun game to watch. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of positive things that I like. I remember reading about, was it Stevie Wonder, one of the famous singers who was blind. He was out climbing trees as a child, getting out and doing things. And sometimes parents get so overprotective, they don't let their kid do enough stuff. I'm seeing smart autistic kids that are honor students in school, never gone shopping by themselves. This is ridiculous. Got to teach these basic skills.
Yeah. And opportunities to be successful.
Yeah, that's right. It's sort of a, can-do attitude.
Yeah.
I really like what Stephen Hawking had to say, changing the attitude.
I think there was lots on what you shared today that our trainees and our scientists would be very thankful for. It was thrilling having you here. Thank you for agreeing to do this. Your books are on the list of reading materials for our students and our scientists to see how one has translated something that back in the 50s would have been considered a serious disability to such a powerful example of a strengths-based success story for contribution to the sciences, but also to the autistic community. Wonderful. Thank you so much.